The result of the stress is hypercortisolism. Too much cortisol in the bloodstream. We see this over and over in every case of obesity. But now hypercortisolism has all kinds of side effects. So what are the side effects of hypercortisolism? Well, one of the things it does is, and all of this has now been documented. Now our job here is to get this bloody information out there. So you stop the madness. Okay, what hypercortisolism does is it suppresses the production of leptin. We need leptin. Leptin is your body, it not only suppresses leptin receptors, it also suppresses the effect of leptin. Leptin is your body's internal cue that tells you to stop eating. You've got, because of the stresses, you've got signals telling you, I need energy. I need fast forms of energy. And so you're craving those foods that are high caloric, simple carbohydrates to get the energy fix that you need. And the mechanism you need to tell you to stop is the very mechanism that's been shut down. But it gets worse. Hypercortisolism suppresses the nucleus accumbens. So now we know that there's a direct connection between something going on in the bloodstream and something operating deep inside the limbic system. And this system, deep inside the limbic system, is what we need for healthy reward seeking. I'm not saying this right. The consequence of this is something called anhedonia. Did you know this, Jerry? All of this has been proved. Anhedonia for any shrink is, oh my God, how do I deal with this? Because what it means is you don't experience pleasure anymore. That nucleus accumbens is what I'm trying to make a deeper point here. You don't have to memorize all the chemistry. The deeper point here is that you need the nucleus accumbens so that you do things that are good for you, like exercise. When you get, so we're having a wave of things happening that are triggered by excessive stress, and it suppresses leptin, it suppresses our desire for healthy activities. That's where the self-control mindset took hold, the idea you got to force yourself to exercise. But it doesn't work. So now what happens is the body starts to turn on itself. It starts to manufacture its own stress. The body becomes the source of its own stress. And this is what we see with something like intestinal allergies, right? Where this has nothing to do with self-control. It has to do with pushing that stress recovery system past the point where it can function. And it turns on itself, it starts to create its own stressors. And so we now know that one of the biggest stressors in obesity is abdominal fat. It is in fact a physiological stressor. All of this was not understood. All of this was seen as, I mean, if this was understood, you would never have seen a dieting book. A dieting book is a nonsense. Everybody here knows that it doesn't work, yet you still buy the damn things because somebody gives you false hope. Yep. Yeah, please, Jerry.
And I think the first case that led to Letty and his team was an obesity case.
I did not know that.
When they treated, she lost all this weight, came back a year later heavier than when they started, and they began to ask different questions.
So I need somebody in our team to track that down for me. Okay? That's awesome.
Yeah.
And what Jerry's point is exactly the point, right? So why? That's our question. Remember, we're non-judgmental. What we want to do is we want to understand. So here we've got this case of I assume it was a young kid. She's obese. They work with her. She takes the weight off, and then a year later, it's even worse. Why? So you know the answer, right? Because you haven't addressed the cause. And the cause was stress. The cause was a stress load. Now, what are the stresses? Well, let's figure it out. Is it biological? Is it sensory? Is it crowds? Is it social? Is it emotional? Well, guess what? It's probably going to be all 5. And so what happened was they got completely, like, we just flipped it from what it should have been. What we're trying to do is break a stress cycle. And we break the stress cycle by going through the 5 steps. Now we're going to reframe the obesity, and we're going to see this is as significant an indicator of overstress as a clinical depression. These are different, we have different ways of reading this. And the fact that we're seeing this in so many of our kids now tells us we have to do something. Okay, so how do we break the stress cycle? Well, that's why we're here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, I realize now, if you read the science carefully, okay, so we know that obesity is a strong, okay, I have to say this very carefully. Obesity is a strong predictor of metabolic syndrome. So if you don't know what metabolic syndrome is, I don't have time to explain it now. Just look it up, metabolic syndrome. That's why that's why docs get scared about okay, so with metabolic syndrome, now you're at very high risk of diabetes, et cetera. So what they found was, it turns out that the obesity is not, in fact, the cause of metabolic. This is Crusoe's, he deserves a Nobel for this. It's not the obesity that causes the metabolic syndrome, it's the stress. The weight doesn't actually have any bearing on your health. Oh my God, how could we have gotten this so wrong? So if I can reduce the stress, I don't give a shit about the weight. What I care about is the health of this individual. And what's impairing the individual's health is not the adipose concentrations in the waist. It's the stress load, which is overloading that recovery system needed for all of these metabolic functions. That's why it leads to so now we see a very nice thing happening in our culture, where all of a sudden influential figures are saying, stop this already. Stop these images which are creating emotional stresses on our kids. Now we have to help them. We have to take them to the next step. And what we have to do is we have to say, okay, what's essential here is their health. What's essential here is their ability to deal with stress, mitigate stress, recover from stress, know what, well, that's enough. That's how you break a stress cycle. By looking at it calmly, by looking at it objectively. And incidentally, what we find is that you do in fact lose weight. And the reason why you lose weight is not because you were trying. The weight issue becomes irrelevant. What's happening is the body's coming back to health. And not just physical health, it's coming back to emotional and psychological health.